Good evening, everyone. I'm Jen Penarski, and I'm a communications officer here at the City of Kingston. And thank you for spending your evening with us as we talk about flood mitigation, flood protection in the Abbey Dawn neighborhood. We have 42 people who are registered to participate in Zoom tonight, and we have 19 who have now joined us here on Zoom. I see some familiar names, so welcome Anthony, Barb, David, Dean, Elaine, Frank, Councillor Oosterhoff, and many others. I'm going to start the presentation now. We are live stream, and hopefully everyone else who filters in later on, they will be able to see the bulk of the presentation from the project team. So thank you again. I'm just going to adjust my screen here so that I can see everyone and still see my screen. So welcome and thank you for spending some time with us this evening. This is the public open house for flood protection measures for Abbey Dawn Road, Highway 2, and St. Lawrence Avenue. This session is live streamed and recorded. And to protect your privacy, attendees, your videos and microphones are turned off. We do have some technology troubleshooting tips for you. So a couple of options depending on your version of Zoom is you can adjust your screen size and your view options. You can do those underneath the video settings in Zoom. You can visit Get Involved Kingston for resources. If you get disconnected from Zoom and you need to call in, please call this number 1-647-558-0588. And the webinar ID is 812-8718-3291. And you can also follow along on YouTube where the session is closed captioned and live streamed. It'll also be recorded and available immediately following this public open house. There will be a formal Q&A session for this public open house, and here's how to ask questions. And we'll also repeat this at the end of the presentation and have the slide up so that you don't have to worry about remembering it now. You can ask a question in writing by typing in the Q&A area. So that's down at the bottom of your screen, and it looks like a little question bubble. And your name and your question will be read out to all participants, and just your first name, not your last name. You can ask a question verbally during the Q&A period, and your microphone will be enabled. And to ask a question verbally, you will use the raise hand function in Zoom. And the Q&A responses will be shared in the reporting back. If this is your first time joining us for a public engagement session, welcome. If it is new for you, I have up on the screen our guidelines for participation. And the guidelines for participation were developed as part of the city's public engagement framework. And they were developed with council and staff and residents alike to make sure that the way that we engage with you is transparent and fair and open. So I'm going to leave these up on the screen for a moment and let you read through them. If you have any concerns about the guidelines for participation, I'll ask you to use the raise hand function and we'll address any concerns, or you can put them into the chat. So I don't see any concerns with the guidelines for participation. I will acknowledge that, like I said, there were 42 people who were registered to participate in this evening's session, and we have 22 people who have joined us here on Zoom. So just as a reminder, if you are late joining us or not able to join us this evening, this session is recorded to YouTube and will be available for viewing after the session ends. And from here, I'm going to turn it over to the project team. So Steve and Ratha, welcome, and I'll let you take it from here.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the public open house for the enhanced flood protection of Abbey Dawn Road, Highway 2, and St. Lawrence Avenue. Next slide, please. So just to start us off, I'm going to go through the agenda. We're going to do the introductions for those speaking today on the project team. We're going to review the existing conditions of the project site, review the problems and opportunities, and our alternative solutions and design concepts being considered. and then review the next steps for the project. Next slide, please. So some of you may have interacted with me before. My name is Radha Malhotra, and I work for the City of Kingston as a project engineer stormwater, and I'm the project manager for this project. Joining us today will be Steve Taylor from BT Engineering Inc., and he's the project manager on the consultant side. Just to do a quick introduction for BTE, they are a specialist transportation engineering firm, which have completed numerous road projects through sensitive environmental areas across southern Ontario over the past 25 years. So this is very beneficial for our project. Next slide, please. So the study area and objectives for this project, the City of Kingston's undertaking a municipal class environmental assessment, otherwise known as a MECA study, and this is to provide enhanced flood protection along Abbey Dawn Road, Highway 2, and St. Lawrence Avenue. So the project limits are Highway 2, for Abbey Dawn Road is Highway 2 northerly 350 meters, St. Lawrence Avenue from Highway 2 to Treasure Island, and the section of Highway 2 bounded by these two roadways. So the objectives of the project, one is to enhance flood protection to reduce future flood risk, and two is to construct lookout features from the city's approved waterfront master plan. Next slide, please. So this project is sponsored in part by the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund from the Government of Canada. The Government of Canada has invested over $9.8 million for citywide shoreline upgrades through this fund. And if you're interested in learning more, there's more information on our Get Involved Kingston webpage about this. Next slide, please. So the purpose of us gathering here today for this public open house is to inform you, the public, of the planned enhanced flood protection to reduce future flood risk, receive your feedback on the preliminary design concepts, including the proposed lookout features in the waterfront master plan, and provide an update on the current project schedule. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Steve. Thank you.
Thanks, Rana. And thank you for the introduction. Yes, I've had a career of delivering transportation projects across Ontario. I'm also a lifelong resident along the St. Lawrence River, so I've got that in common with many of you that are here tonight. We also have environmental and engineering staff that are listening to the presentation and your questions and comments, so we'll be glad to record anything you have for feedback for us to carry forward. This slide describes what is an environmental assessment. So an environmental assessment is actually a planning process prescribed by the province of Ontario for actually constructing new municipal infrastructure. It has 5 guiding principles, and one is that consider all reasonable alternatives, create a baseline of environmental conditions to formulate your decisions, provide traceability in the evaluation of the alternatives, having meaningful public consultation, which we're here tonight to listen, and finally clear and concise documentation. The red box on the screen shows that we're in a Schedule B project, and the project phase or schedules are determined by the complexity and scope and cost of the projects. Next slide, Jen. As part of the planning for this project, we've relied on several background documents, so the city's official plan and the waterfront master plan. Those documents, such as the official plan, actually dictate the classification of the road facilities that we're planning, and that determines some of the design criteria we carried forward. Technical reports that rely on for the design of the roads and features include geotechnical investigations, archaeological investigations, and stormwater background information. Next slide, Jen. So I said one of the background documents that we're relying on is the waterfront master plan. So that the master planning process is recognized in the Environmental Assessment Act, so it completes the first phase of this element of the project, and the project has 2 aspects: the road improvements and the master plan features. And these are 2 of the sites where identified in the master plan that will become part of this project, providing enhancement areas for viewing the water and/or fishing and one on Abbey Dawn, and one on St. Lawrence Avenue. Next slide. So I know this all too well being a resident of the area, but the existing flooding conditions are changing water levels that are dictated primarily by the water levels on an international water body, the St. Lawrence River. And the focus of this study is flood protection for resiliency for higher water levels for all 3 roads under study. Next slide. So as part of the EA, formal EA, and our review of background information to define a baseline of environmental conditions, we rely on many existing documentation, including land use. So the land use in the study area includes the major features are environmental protection area, provincially significant wetland from the Medoma Marsh, and the harbor area, which is the commercial development within the study limits, as well as others. Next slide, please. Because of the sensitive nature within the PSW, we've done natural environmental investigations to provide background information at a detailed level within the areas that we're actually going to construct the project. And using this information, the project aims to provide habitat connectivity, protection, and enhancement for local wildlife and vegetation. Next slide, please. As part of the technical engineering investigations we were completed today, several of them include one, coastal engineering analysis of the wave runup that would change water levels on the road surfaces. So that's been used to forecast wave action from the longest reach to reach the roads under study. Geotechnical investigations to determine the subsurface soil types and elements below the road for any widening. As I said, the natural environmental investigations that will define any effects and mitigation measures that will be included as part of the project, and archaeological investigations and screening with respect to concerns of the province and our First Nation rights holders that are part of the study. Next slide, please. So these are some of the problems and opportunities. So tonight you'll have a chance to identify others, but I'll go through some of the ones that we've identified. So the first, that the roads aren't suitably protected from existing flood events. And again, the mitigation for those types of issues is going to be looking for higher elevations and durability for the sides impacted by wave action. Problems of variable lane and shoulder widths along each of the routes under study. And our design criteria being established to bring up the roads that will be reconstructed to current standards. Third would be potential sediment buildup that's currently occurring with the existing causeway at the Treasure Island. And part of the mitigation measures that we'll be trying to implement is larger waterway openings to convey greater volumes of water, higher velocities to move sediment. Fourth, potential problems or issues is any significant grade raise from either the road or the waterfront master plan features have the ability to cause a greater footprint of loss within the PSWs. And our mitigation measures are going to be to try to limit the footprint impacts in those sensitive areas. And the last on this slide is potential for wildlife mortality existing with the study area. And part of our investigations and mitigation plans will consider means to protect vulnerable wildlife that may end up on the roadway surface. Next slide, Jen. Second slide of potential problems that we're trying to address as part of the project. Any land alteration within the St. Lawrence River or the wetland is going to require permitting. They're covered by both federal and provincial legislation, so there'll be approving agencies that will be making submissions for approvals and permits. And then the second one on this slide is potential for endangered or threatened species. And again, mitigation for these will be to identify where they currently locate, and again, trying to minimize the footprint of the project in areas that they occur. Next slide, Jen. So as part of NEA, the decision-making process I was describing, one of the mandated requirements is to consider alternatives. And for this project, we've considered 4 different strategies for the project. The do nothing is a mandated one for documentation on the Class EA, so that would be the no project alternative. And the other 3 I'll just describe as to 1, provide minimum design standards for the project. The second would be to provide desirable or higher than minimum standards for the project. And the third would be trying to provide, alternatives or designs that exceed design standards. But when you attempt to do that, you end up with potentially higher environmental effects, which require mitigation. So there's a balance between what standard you choose for a road project and the environmental effects. I'll come back to these in a second. Next slide. So when comparing the approach for the design, we just considered several elements. The environmental effects of what the designs are, public's issues that they've identified, planning objectives of the city, and others such as durability and maintenance of the facilities. Those have all gone into what we've formulated as a recommended preliminary concepts that we'll show tonight, and looking for comments. Next slide, Jen. So of those 4 approaches for the projects, we've landed on the one that I described as meeting desirable design standards. Again, getting suitable resiliency protection for floodwaters, but not exceeding them to a point that there's greater environmental effects. So what we're describing is what we think is a balanced solution, looking at the engineering constraints that we've imposed with. Engineering and environmental constraints we've imposed with. Next slide, Jen. So I know through the projects sequentially. So the first Abbey Dawn Road, this is the design concept that we're proposing. So this is a rural local road, lower volumes than say Highway 2. The proposal is that there will be a small elevation increase of the existing road, so the minimum road elevation will go up. It won't be excessively increased because there's potential for upstream water level changes, and we don't want to do that. It is going to provide a consistent lane and shoulder platform, and a consistent road surface, so a better surface than there is today across the wetland. Next slide, Jen. This one, there's several that look like this, so I'm just going to describe. So this is a plan and profile drawing. So the top is looking from the sky at the road design. It shows the location of the wetland and the water course. And the bottom is a profile, which is looking at the road slice through the road, looking horizontally. It's exaggerated scale, and it's a little bit difficult to see on this slide, but there's actually a proposed elevation of the road, and I'm just going to draw on this. I'm going to point to that. So that would be the proposed elevation of the road, and a faint gray line below it is existing road elevation. It's down here. So there would be a graze rate for the smallest portion, or the lowest portion of the road through the wetland. Again, that's providing protection for our design storm across this road. And it's in close proximity, you can tell, to the edge of the right-of-way and close to the water course on the east side of the road. It will include a new culvert with a larger waterway opening. Next slide, Jen. So the second road under study is Highway 2. And the proposal is that we'll reconstruct about 500 meters of the road. The existing culvert will be maintained. It's a piece of infrastructure that's actually not reached the end of its service life. It has lots of service life left, so we're not going to chuck it or change it. The road elevation will be raised to provide improved flood protection. So it's just under a meter that we're looking at raising the road in the lowest areas. And we'll provide consistent lane widths, which are generally what are today, and then wider shoulders, including the shoulder rounding, and fully paved shoulders within the study limits. Again, these all are meeting desirable design standards in the province. Next slide. So again, this shows up on 2 slides, Highway 2. So again, on this slide, I'm just going to annotate. So the dark line here is the current road elevation, and I'm going to point to the light gray line. So the lowest portion of the road is just to the east of the existing culvert, and that rises as you go easterly, so it gets higher and higher. So the grade raise is maximum right to the immediately east of the culvert, but it'll be a smooth vertical alignment change, meeting the design speed of the road. You go to the next slide, Jen. It continues easterly, and as it meets the intersection with St. Lawrence Avenue, you can see the road rising in elevation, and the limit of the floodproofing ends generally just before we get to St. Lawrence Avenue. The existing commercial entrances will be maintained, commercial and residential entrances on Highway 2. If you can go to the next slide, Jen. So this is St. Lawrence Avenue. So the existing or the design concept is that the existing culvert waterway opening areas will be increased. The number of culverts will be reduced from 4 to 3. As I described, our intent is to actually have more opening and with less culverts in locations that currently have better flow through the cattails. We'll get higher velocities and then allow movement of sediment in this area of the causeway. There'll be a minor road elevation from what exists today, which is building upon the elevation that was put in from the emergency measures from the recent flooding. And the design elevation of the road will accommodate both the future high water levels of the St. Lawrence River, wave action, and we also have a clearance above that design level. So it'll be a modest, about 300 millimeter increase from what's there today. But the major changes, it's going to be widened from the current short-term measures that were implemented. We'll have 3 meter lanes for both north and southbound directions, 1.5 meter shoulders, and then the rounding beyond the shoulders. And what you can see on this slide, it's been intentionally designed so the widening is predominantly to the east side, so that there'll be no effect to the marine channel along the side with the marina. Next slide, Jen. This just shows it in plan and profile view again. So there's about 500 meters of St. Lawrence Avenue that will be reconstructed. Again, ties in a higher elevation of Highway 2. And then across the wetland, there'll be about a 300 millimeter grade raise from the existing increased elevation from the emergency measures. There'll be changes for the access control along St. Lawrence Avenue. So there are several existing entrances that have no status with permitting. Proposal is that we would improve the drainage by reinstating the rural ditch flow along St. Lawrence Avenue to the wetland. Next slide, Jen. So this shows the south end with the reconstruction. It's hard to tell from this plan, but there's a minor shift of the cross section to the east. In the middle of this slide, there is a location for the general. There's a location of our water feature. So it's located between 2 new culverts, and it's in generally an area with good view and a view to the east. And again, our proposal is to take the 4 existing culverts, overall increase the waterway opening, but change the number of culverts from 4 to 3. Next slide, Jen. So the second aspect of the project is the master plan features. So again, we have 2 proposed, one on Abbey Dawn Road and one on St. Lawrence Avenue. We have a landscape architect on staff who's been in charge of the design for the features. Concepts you'll show tonight are ones that have been carried forward, but they have considered existing features that are in the area and design elements of those features. Next slide, Jen. So we'll start off by just taking a look at Abbey Dawn Road. So this is located on the east side, so it's where the road is in closest proximity to the open water as it flows southerly to the river. So this design would be providing a natural armor stone blocks stepped down to the water. It provide both a viewing area and a fishing area, and it would be durable materials, natural materials that fit with the environmental setting of the wetland. So that was our option one. Next slide, Jen. This is the second version, and it was one where we were trying to utilize an elevated platform. So this would be a wooden platform. It would provide the fishing area at a higher elevation, but we've constrained ourselves to the project being within the existing right-of-way. So you can see at the top of this slide, there is a property line shown. I'll just circle it. So that's the existing property line. You can see by the time we do our road reconstruction that the wooden platform is very small. I think it's in and around 1.5 meters or less. And it was a concept that was developed, but the space wasn't as great as we'd want for that kind of facility. So that was option two for the lookout and fishing feature on Abbey Dawn Road. Next slide, Jen. So the feature at St. Lawrence Avenue is looking to provide a viewing area with greater space. So what we've done for it is we have shown that we would again respect the property line for the feature. It would provide a greater space. We've shown the viewing area platform kind of capping the end of the space with an armor stone. And it would have any of the fill that would go beyond the property line would be subject to MNRF's permitting process and DFO approvals, but our proposal is that we make the full use of the right-of-way up to the edge of the property line, and that would be for pedestrians. So this would be anyone in the area for walking, evening walks, walking the dog, coming out, viewing, following the new constructed road along the shoulder, coming to the viewing area. Just clear that. Next slide, Jen. Yeah. So locations. So again, the EA can determine the locations, but Abbey Dawn Road, our preliminary assessment of locations is we wanted it close to the water for fishing. So as you saw in the plan view, there was a good fit for where the water course naturally came back and meandered back along the edge of the road, on the east side of the road. So it would be along the edge of the right-of-way, good for fishing, minimize the footprints in the PSW, and would be located outside the influence of the intersection of Highway 2, and that's good for safety of pedestrians that are using the facility. Next slide, Jen. So St. Lawrence Avenue, so I showed it on the plan view, but our intent is to put it on the east side of the roadway. It provides the best view of the water. It doesn't encroach on the marine access on the west side. And the recommendation is to constrain the feature within the roadway right-of-way. And again, to limit any disturbance to the PSW or turtle nesting that occurs in the watercourse. Next slide, Jen. So as part of the EA activities, we will provide documentation with comparison of the alternatives. So that'll be in our project file at the very end. I'm just giving you a small snapshot, but our preliminary preference, looking at the features at Abbey Dawn Road, is for the armor stone stepped blocks down to the water. It has a lower maintenance cost. It's got natural materials advantages. It minimizes footprint in the PSW. And when compared to the wooden platform, we were concerned about trip hazards between the two surfaces, between the armor stones and the wooden platform. And again, our recommendation is something that's respectful of the natural environment that it's contained in. Next slide, Jen. Okay.
So thank you, Steve. For this project, our consultation plan includes agency consultation, public consultation, and Indigenous peoples engagement. The Indigenous peoples engagement is continuous and started when we first got the Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund. Next slide, please. So consultation to date includes the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks Study Commencement Notice, Indigenous consultation, Get Involved Kingston, and agency notice. So agencies such as the Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority and the Ministry of Natural Environment and Forestry. We've also conducted some site meetings. Well, BTE has visited the site with the CRCA, which is the Cataraqui Region Conservation Authority, and Turtles Kingston to review the project scope and obtain any comments on the natural environment. Next slide, please. So the next steps following this public open house is the project team will compile all public feedback and produce a public engagement summary. And this summary will be available to you through the Get Involved Kingston webpage. Currently, we are conducting environmental inventories and technical investigations. Once these are completed, the environmental inventories will be compiled into environmental impact assessment report. Following that report, we'll draft the applications for the environmental permits and approvals. Once the municipal class environmental assessment is completed, the project file is completed, we will distribute a notice of study completion, and that will be approximately in the fall 2021. And we're aiming for the final design to be completed in winter 2021 and construction to be conducted in 2022, and this is subject to permits and approvals. Next slide, please. So your involvement, how can you stay involved? So you can request your name and email to be added to the resident email mailing list, and you'll receive some status updates. Or you can also give your feedback on the preliminary design concepts discussed today. The feedback time period will be open from August 25th, which is today, to September 8th at 4 p.m. And comments can be submitted through Get Involved Kingston, over the phone, or by mail. Next slide, please. So I'd like to conclude by thanking everyone for giving up their evening today and for attending. We encourage you to complete a comment form or Get Involved Kingston, even the comments that are verbally addressed to us today. If you can fill out the comment form, that would be great as well. And just keep in mind that the comments session ends September 8th at 4 p.m. And I'll turn it over to Jen now.
Hi, everyone. So welcome back. That concludes the formal presentation, and I'll get Radha and Steve, you can turn your cameras back on. I have up on Zoom right now is how to ask questions, and then I'll turn that off shortly. So to ask questions in writing, you can type them into the Q&A and I'll read them out, and along with your first name. And then to ask questions verbally, you can use the raise hand tool on Zoom, and then we'll unmute your mic, and then you can ask questions that way. And as Radha noted, please do also go to Get Involved Kingston, where the comment form is active, and you can offer feedback that way as well. So I'm going to start with Yvonne. I see that you have a couple of questions in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the one that you asked first, and then we'll make sure that we get through everyone's questions, and then we'll get to your follow-up questions. So Yvonne's first question is, other problems are of a safety concern where active mobility exists within narrow confines with vehicle traffic often traveling at high speeds.
So yes, thank you, Yvonne, for your question. So a part of the reconstruction, we are including shoulder improvements, and this will bring the shoulders up to city standards and provide more space than currently exists within the shoulders. We also, along Highway 2 and St. Lawrence Avenue, are providing painted buffers within the shoulder, and painted buffers are recommended as a traffic calming solution. So we have a narrower travel lane, which will promote lower speeds. by motorists, and additional separation distance between the vehicles and the shoulder. So there will also be that visual barrier and the physical distance.
The next question comes from Tara, and she asks, as an alternative, has the option of bridges been considered? This would help to increase flow instead of culverts and would allow the river and wetlands to have more freedom to be natural and alter and adjust as they would to water levels. I understand this would likely cost more money, but at the surface, I would expect it to be better for the provincially significant wetland.
Thank you for your question. So that's something that we haven't considered. And this is a update reconstruction project of the road. So I don't know if that would be in the scope of work for us in this project, but definitely something to consider for the future. Thank you.
We have a question from John, and he asks, will the expanded shoulder along Highway 2 be wide enough for cyclists? John, I paraphrased a little bit there, so if you'd like to correct me, just raise your hand and I'll unmute you.
Okay, I guess that's okay with John. So the facilities, the shoulder will be widened to, if we could go back to that slide and have it up on the screen.
Which slide was that? And I'll make sure that it's up.
So it's page 21. So Highway 2 will have a 2-meter wide shoulder with a 0.5 meter buffer. So you'll have 1.5 meters to travel with your bike in that lane. So this will not be a designated active transport lane for biking, as the active transportation master plan did not highlight this area to be for active transportation facilities, but we have widened the shoulder.
Radha, this is the one that you wanted to show was the Highway 2 design concept, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Jen.
Okay, Gunnar, I see that you have your hand up, so I am going to unmute your mic and go ahead. Gunnar, are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Great. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Highway 2, Abbey Dawn, and St. Lawrence Avenue shouldn't be where they are because all of them interfered with natural water flow. It does not appear that you've done anything about correcting that. Particularly, I'm worried about silting on the east side of St. Lawrence Island, or of Treasure Island, sorry, and all the entire water course. We need flow in there, and what has been done to go and improve the flow?
So I'll answer half the question and then give it over to Steve to answer about the flow aspect of the question. Thank you, Gunnar. So this project aims to provide increased habitat connectivity and protection and enhancement to local wildlife. So we are going through and completing all the required environmental investigations and work with the regulatory agencies, provincial and federal regulatory agencies, to get the permissions and clearances that we need to complete this project and provide short-term construction and long-term solutions that are carried out in a environmentally responsible manner. The waterfront master plan features are also given a modest footprint, and this is to keep in mind that we don't want to have a large impact on the environment. And also, all the environmental investigations will be funneled into an environmental impact assessment report And that report will go over wildlife nesting patterns, hibernation patterns, overwintering habitats. So that will detail everything, and that document will guide us on where to put the master plan features, how to reconstruct the road. So we are being responsible. We are conducting responsible construction and putting in responsible features. So Steve, go ahead.
I was just going to add, great answer, but we have to recognize that the provincial policy statement does allow road corridors through PSWs. So we're trying to do it in a respectful way, as Rada just described. With respect to the concern for sediment transport, which we want to occur along the river, what we've done is we've recommended to reduce the number of culverts, but increase the waterway opening by 20%, and to focus the area that we've got the culverts and the larger culverts at the areas that have more defined channels. So water flow should be able to go from west to east through those culverts, moving sediment. So more water, higher velocities, moving sediment.
Okay, we'll go on to our next question from Anthony. And his feedback is, my sense is that the proposal focuses mostly on improving the conditions for the movement of cars to enable recreation opportunities for people. Could we place much more emphasis on actually improving the natural environment, not balancing or minimizing footprint, but actually improving habitat from the perspective of the creatures that live here?
So yes, so the project goal, one of the project goals is to improve, enhance local wildlife. And we'll know more about the environmental features that we need to implement once the environmental impact assessment report has been completed. We are welcoming comments about what environmental features the public are looking for, but we will be implementing the features based on our findings of the environmental impact assessment, because that assessment will go through and help us understand and become experts in the area and ensure that the wildlife in the area are not impacted negatively.
I just add on to that, Rada, the sequential decision making is we're trying to define the design criteria for the roads, where they will be and footprints and effects. Sort of a next step is, once we have the defined project element for the flood control, is to look at mitigation measures and improvements that can be enhancements as part of the project. So it's sort of a next step after we define the physical road project, is the environmental component of the plan. And we do have our environmental engineers listening tonight, and they will be part of that next step.
Thank you. So I see lots of questions coming in. That's great. I see some, a few of you have asked questions a couple of times. So like I said earlier, we're going to get through everyone's first question first, and then we'll move on to second questions. Alan and Mabon, I do see your hands raised, and I will get to you, I promise, but I'm going to go on to a question from Elaine, who submitted it in writing, and she asks, how will the location of the 3 culverts improve better water flow into the bay on the east side of the St. Lawrence?
So again, the river flows from west to east. If you increase the volume of water that's flowing from west to east, it will help move sediment, easterly on the river. If you go back before, I think it's 1950, before there was a causeway there, the flow would have been west to east. It would have been carried sediment. Sediment transport's a natural part of the river regime. And what we're doing is we're trying to improve what is an existing condition today.
Okay, Alan, thank you for your patience. I've turned on your mic, so you're free to ask your question when you're ready.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. It's been terrific. I guess I'm cheating a little bit here, 2 questions, but the area on the causeway for viewing, it seemed to have a bench there and things. Will that accommodate an automobile? Like if someone comes from elsewhere as opposed to walking their dog and parks their car, is that going to be in that viewing area, or is that going to be on the causeway? Or I couldn't quite figure that out from the drawings.
For sure. So thank you, Alan, for your comment. So parking is being considered on Abbey Dawn Road. We're going through internally and reviewing the feasibility of having parking along Abbey Dawn Road. Likely, it will be on the same side as the lookout feature, so people aren't crossing the road just to get to the lookout feature. It will be outside of the provincially significant wetland, so we do have a lot of brainstorming to do around the parking and where to put it on Abbey Dawn Road. Contrary to the Waterfront Master Plan, currently we don't see need for parking on St. Lawrence Avenue for this feature.
To confirm, Alan, there would be no parking. There would not be an opportunity for a car to physically park at the feature on St. Lawrence Avenue.
It would be accessible by foot only.
Yes.
Yeah, or bike.
Yeah. And I'm going to sneak in the second the water flow, and this is when I story stuff, but 30 years ago, there was 1/3 the number of bulrushes on the east side. By enlarging the culvert, are we going to go back to that, or are we going to end up with the same level of wetland as we have now, i.e. a bunch of that is now not nearly as deep as it used to be? Is it going to go back to where it was 30 years ago, or is it going to stay as it is today?
So I think it's had, I don't know, 50 plus years to reach an equilibrium. Probably 30 years ago, maybe it was still working towards an equilibrium where there was no causeway before. Not exactly sure the date of the causeway construction, but we don't expect that this change will maintain the channels for flow. It's not expected to remove any of the wetland area. So, and we don't want to remove the wetland area. We just want to open up passages for more velocity in the channels that exist through the cattail areas.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, so I'm going to go to a question from Steve, who asks, is there a possibility of traffic calming on the causeway? Driving tends to be really fast.
For sure. So our painted buffers that we're recommending, coupled with the narrower lanes, will facilitate some traffic calming. It will act as a traffic calming solution. So the narrower lanes, so now it's going to be 3 meters, will promote drivers to drive at a lower speed. And then you have a visual barrier with the painted buffer between the shoulder and the motorist's lane. And then you have additional separation distance. So this traffic calming measure was considered because it takes into account no additional widening of the roadway. And this is because we're in a sensitive area, provincially significant wetlands. So it's the balance that Steve mentioned there.
We will be looking at a safety barrier along the road, which will also constrict and make it feel narrow. Those kind of elements do reduce travel speeds.
Okay, the next is a comment from William, who says, it looks like you're providing ditching along St. Lawrence Avenue. Plus, it looks like you're closing the entry of the existing 2 driveways along St. Lawrence Avenue. One goes to the garage and the other goes to the mechanical shop of Treasure Island Marina. I would suggest this closing of the driveways creates an undue hardship on both of these citizens. I recommend a culvert be put in across the driveways in order to permit the ditching flow of water and the driveways remain functional.
So thank you for that comment. These current entrances, we did some background review into our city files, and these entrances are not legal. And so that's why we're the combination of that and us going in and improving the drainage of the area, the removal of the entrances will help improve the drainage of the site into the rural cross-section. And because these aren't legal, we would be removing them. And all these properties have access entrances which are legal off of Highway 2.
Mabon, you've been so patient. I'm going to turn on your microphone so that you can ask your question.
Thank you very much. I have more comments than question, and the questions are going to evolve from the comments that I have to make. I can express a few opinions on behalf of the thousands of hard-shelled citizens of the city of Kingston, the Turtles. But it's not just opinions, it's also observations, because I did participate in the site evaluation with the attending biologist and the CRCA. There are some major concerns. I am really glad that the EA aspect of this project is forthcoming, because there are many concerns that I would like to make the public aware of. Presence of Blanding's turtles, for example. I have a confirmed presence of a Blanding's turtle that is classified as threatened. Unfortunately, the sighting was not reported. It was reported to me personally. And because they are classified as threatened, their habitats must be protected, which would imply that mitigation measures are not a choice, but an obligation. So I have a few concerns. Of course, that would imply the installation of exclusion fencing. This is a Turtle Road mortality hotspot. We have received many calls over the past few years. We have responded to a number of them, especially from the gentleman that used to own the gardening center right at the intersection of Abbey Dawn and Route 2. Called us very emotional, very upset because of the slaughter of turtles that he witnessed there. So that alone speaks to the obligation for the implementation of mitigation measures. The eco passages are being attended to, which is great, because that is part of the mitigation, except that there should be another one on Route 2 higher up than the intersection with St. Lawrence, going further east. One of the major concerns are the water features. One is parking was a big issue. Of course, if you are going to endorse parking on Abbey Dawn, then you're going to have to install mitigation measures, because you certainly cannot have people parking on the side of a road that is an acknowledged nesting site for turtles. It's a contradiction. So there could not be parking unless there were mitigation measures implemented, because you'd be inviting the turtles to certain death, and the nests would be jeopardized by the parking of the vehicles. The other major concern of the water features, which I don't think has been considered, is fishing. Fishing and turtles do not get along. Now, the water feature on St. Lawrence is a major concern because it's going to be situated between the two culverts. The two culverts are going to act as the eco passage for the turtles so that the wetland isn't fragmented. Well, if you have people fishing off of that at the exact point where an endangered species is using as a passage, you're inviting them to certain death. Everybody knows with, unfortunately, when turtles are hooked, everyone cuts their lines, which is the worst possible thing you can do. Dr. Sue Carstairs, who is the veterinarian for the Ontario Turtle Conservation Centre in Peterborough, who take in anywhere from 1,000 to 1,600 turtles a year that need trauma treatment. It's the only dedicated turtle hospital in all of North America. She received equipment over the past 2 years, which enabled her to indiscriminately x-ray the turtles. And she couldn't believe the majority of the turtles that had ingested fishing hooks that had not been removed. Now, this is definitely going to shorten their lives. The species is already one of the most imperiled vertebrate species on the planet. They serve us well because they eat the carrion and decaying vegetation in any still waterways. We know that only 2.7% of the world's water is a freshwater source. 20% of that is in Canada, most of that in Ontario. So the wetlands are your reservoirs. Well, turtles are your janitors. You remove them out of the wetlands and that wetland implodes with bacteria. So they service well. The only thing they ask for is their survival. So fishing in a turtle habitat is a massive contradiction. The one on Abbey Dawn, the same. In fact, even worse so, because it's directly into the wetlands. So that one would easily be as consequential as the one on St. Lawrence. These water features, the first thing that the city has to do is acknowledge that it is located in the middle of a provincially significant wetland. So that's to be celebrated and not to be taken advantage of or exploited. So because of that, the first template that has to go on any project is the template for the protection of the environment and the endangered species that live within. So
Maven, hi, it's Jen. We're very glad that you joined us, but we do have a number of other questions and other people that are waiting.
Yeah, I know, but in a public meeting, I know I am entitled to 5 minutes.
I know,
so
I do understand that our public engagement sessions are a little bit different than a delegation or to a committee, and we've promised residents that we would try and wrap up as close to 8 o'clock as possible.
I understand that, and I
No,
respect
I understand, Maven.
the opportunity. I
No,
do
thank you.
appreciate the opportunity. Anyone can take any one of those comments and turn it around and you'll have the question. So
I understand, Maven. And if we have some more time, then we'll definitely open up the mics again. I just want to make sure that everyone else gets a chance to speak. So thank you. Thank you very much. And we do value the work that Turtles Kingston does in the community. So thank
Jen,
you.
I wrote down 3 questions.
Yeah, no, and for sure. Okay, and thank you. And I don't know, Ratha and Steve, if you wanted to address any of Maven's concerns. The one thing that I will also add in is that the comments that are received tonight, they do go into the public engagement summary. And I also added into the chat the link directly to Get Involved Kingston. So please do be sure to click on that link and submit your comments in writing to make sure that they're captured. But I'll turn it over to Ratha and Steve. The other thing like I said, I want to be mindful of is that we committed that we would spend an hour with you this evening. We'll go a little bit over because we do have about 14 more questions in the Q&A and we want to make sure we give everyone an opportunity. Okay, so Ratha and Steve, go ahead.
So if Steve doesn't mind, I'll just say a couple of points and then hand it over to Steve. So the parking on Abbey Dawn, we are working through the feasibility of that, and that also considers the feasibility from an environmental perspective. So that is still up to internal discussions, and this is a preliminary, these are preliminary drawings that you've seen tonight and preliminary plans. Also, the parking along Abbey Dawn Road will be outside the provincially significant wetlands. It will not be within the wetlands. And we also are aware that if wildlife displacement needs to occur, whether that's short-term construction or long-term, that the environmental impact assessment report will inform us of that and will inform us of how to best provide compensation features or alternative habitats for the wildlife. And so these are considerations that we are taking seriously from the city, and we have put it into our project goal that we have. Our goal is to provide increased habitat connectivity, protection, and enhancement of the local wildlife. But we wanted to get the public involved at the early stage because the public has always given that feedback to the City of Kingston. So we're glad we were able to reach out to you guys in the early stage right now. So Steve, go ahead.
Yep. Really good. So that was the answer to the parking on Abbey Dawn. So respectful, it is being considered outside the PSW. With respect to turtle habitat, I've been a lifelong resident of the river, and environmental protection. So I just want to make clear, it's not that it may be a part of the project, it will be part of the project. Our projects have considered exclusion fencing for turtles. We've considered increased the habitat for nesting. Those are all on the table for the next phase or next step of the study. So I'm hoping your organization can be part of that review process, as will the Conservation Authority. And the third question was with respect to the dual uses in the PSW of fishing and turtle habitat. I want to be clear that at least the one feature on St. Lawrence Avenue is not intended for fishing at all. There is no clear path to the water. It's going to be in the cattail area with an elevated platform for viewing. It won't have contact with the water. It's that's the intent of that location. With that, I think we covered off the 3 questions I had written down, Evelyn. But as Jen described, if there are other questions, we'll send back further responses.
There's a lot of follow-up comments that I'll go through as quickly as I can. So there is a question from Frank. When you mention culverts and assessment of such, are you including the culvert bridge crossing Highway 2 to Abbey Dawn? This culvert seems to have what looks like structural damage.
So we've taken a look at the culvert. It's a rigid frame type of structure that it hasn't reached the end of its service life. There may be repairs to it, but the intent of the project is not to replace that culvert. It's not cost effective. It's not its time. It would be another project at a different date.
And it looks like I've gone through everybody's first questions. Some follow-ups is from Yvonne. Do we have measurements of wildlife mortality along any of these sections? Abbey Dawn versus Highway 2 versus St. Lawrence.
So our environmental investigations are currently being conducted. Steve can probably elaborate on this, but as I mentioned,